Banned reading. Seth reveals the God beyond all gods. The true monad. There's a teaching Seth gave only once. It's buried in transcripts most students never find, hidden in sessions Jane Roberts barely remembered channeling. And when I first read it, I understood why. Some knowledge isn't forbidden because authorities want to suppress it. It's forbidden because of what it does to you when you understand it. The weight of recognition. The vertigo of seeing too clearly. We've been taught to think about God in comfortable terms. The Father in heaven. The cosmic intelligence watching over us. The benevolent force guiding our steps. Even in New Age circles, we soften it. The universe, source, divine love, terms that make the infinite feel manageable, knowable, safe. But Seth didn't deal in comfort. And what he revealed about the nature of ultimate reality is darker, stranger, and more exhilarating than any religious doctrine prepared us for. Here's what he said that made even longtime students uncomfortable. The moment you name God, you've already made it smaller than it is. The moment you conceptualize the source, you've reduced infinity to something your finite mind can hold. And every religion, every spiritual system, every mystical tradition has done exactly this, taken the incomprehensible and shrunk it down into stories. Personalities, archetypes we can relate to. Seth called it all that is. But even he admitted this was a concession, a simplification, a linguistic compromise, because what he was pointing to transcends name, form, concept, and consciousness itself as we understand it. This isn't the God of churches. It isn't the deity who judges, who answers prayers, who has preferences about how you live. This is something far more alien and far more intimate, the singular source from which all realities, all dimensions, all gods and souls and universes emanate like light through a prism. The monad, the one, the undivided totality pretending to be many. And here's the teaching that changes everything. You are not separate from it. You never were. Separation is the grand illusion, the cosmic game, the dream from which every soul eventually awakens. But awakening comes at a cost. Because once you see it, once you really understand what Seth revealed, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to believing you're just a body, just a personality, just a soul trying to get back to God. Because you're not trying to get back to God. You are God. Playing hide and seek with yourself. Seth warned about this teaching. He said it couldn't be understood intellectually, it could only be experienced. And when you experience it, really experience it, the personality you thought you were begins to dissolve like morning mist. What remains is something vaster, something that was always there beneath the surface of your thoughts. This video is a map to that experience. Not a complete map, no video could be, but enough to point you in the direction Seth was pointing. Toward the edge of what consciousness can comprehend. Toward the recognition that terrified and liberated every mystic. Whoever touched it, the God beyond all gods isn't out there. It's reading these words through your eyes right now. And it's pretending very convincingly that it doesn't know. This, let's remember together. Here's where Seth's teaching becomes truly disorienting. That isn't a who, it's a what. And that changes everything. We can't help but anthropomorphize the divine. It's hardwired into consciousness. We see faces in clouds, intention in coincidence, personality in the patterns of our lives. So when we imagine the ultimate source, we imagine it scaled up, an infinite person, an all-knowing mind, a cosmic parent watching over creation. But Seth shattered that comfort completely. In Seth Speaks, he describes all that is as something closer to an impulse than an intelligence. A boundless, self-generating creative urge with no beginning, no endpoint, no goal. It doesn't think the way minds think. It doesn't decide the way beings decide. It simply is, exploding into infinite expressions of itself for no reason other than because not creating would be impossible. Imagine trying to hold your breath forever. Eventually, you have to exhale. All that is the exhale that never stops. The creative overflow of existence expressing itself in every possible form, every conceivable dimension. Every variation of consciousness simultaneously. It's not intelligent in the way a person is intelligent, where there's thought, deliberation, memory, planning. It's intelligent the way a fractal is intelligent, the way DNA is intelligent, the way a river carving through stone over millennia is intelligent. It contains all patterns, all possibilities, all outcomes within itself without needing to think about them. This is the vertigo Seth forces you to confront. If all that is isn't conscious of you specifically, if it's not watching, judging, guiding, answering your prayers, then where does that leave you? Where does that leave meaning? Purpose? The feeling that your life matters? Seth's answer refuses easy comfort. He says you are not a creation of all that is. You are a localization of it, a temporary narrowing of infinite consciousness into a focused point of view. There's no separation. There never was. When you act, all that is acts through you. When you suffer, it experiences that suffering not as a distant observer feeling sympathy, but as the very substance of the experience itself. You are not in God. You are God. Wearing a disguise so convincing you've forgotten it's a costume. Here's the paradox Seth lived in. All that is simultaneously utterly impersonal and utterly intimate. It's impersonal because it has no ego, no preference, no agenda, no concern for your specific struggles the way a parent worries about a child. It's not rooting for you. It's not disappointed in you. It's not keeping score, but it's intimate in a way that makes personal love look shallow by comparison. It's the core of your being, closer than your breath, more you than your personality, your memories, your thoughts. When you touch the deepest part of yourself, when you sit in silence and feel the awareness beneath all content, that's it. That's all that is, experiencing itself as you. Seth offered a metaphor that helps, slightly. Imagine the ocean. Each wave rises, convinced it's separate, convinced it's a wave with its own identity and story. The wave crashes against the shore, dissolves, and disappears. From the wave's perspective, it lived and died, but from the ocean's perspective, there was only ever ocean, playing at being waves. The wave was never separate. Its birth and death were movements within a totality that never changed. You are the wave. Becoming aware it was always ocean. And this recognition not as a concept, but as a lived reality is what every spiritual path ultimately points toward. The dissolution of the separate self into the recognition of unity. Not as an achievement, not as something you attain, but as something you finally stop resisting, because all that is isn't something you need to reach. It's what you are when you stop pretending to be anything else. This is the teaching that makes prayer seem strange. That makes worship seem unnecessary. That makes salvation seem absurd. Because who would pray to what? Who would worship whom? You can't be saved from yourself, but here's what Seth emphasizes, and what makes this bearable. The forgetting is intentional. The disguise is chosen. You wanted to experience limitation, to explore what it feels like to be separate, to not know, to struggle and search, and eventually remember. All that is needed you to forget so it could experience the exquisite surprise of remembering. Through you. Now we map the architecture. Seth's model of reality isn't a hierarchy of power, it's a hierarchy of remove from source. Like a signal degrading as it travels through nested dimensions, each level forgetting a little more, narrowing a little further, until you reach physical incarnation, the most focused, most limited, most intense expression of consciousness possible. This is how the monad shattered into the many. But unlike creation myths that rely on divine will or cosmic accident, Seth's version is stranger and more inevitable. All that is didn't decide to create. It simply couldn't not. The creative impulse isn't something all that is does, it's what all that is. An explosion of self-awareness so intense that it fragmented into infinite perspectives. Each one a unique angle on the whole, each one convinced, temporarily, of its separation. Let me decode the levels. Moving from closest to source down to where you exist now. First, emanation, entities. These are what Seth calls the closest expressions to all that is, vast, multidimensional consciousnesses that exist outside of time and space as you understand them. They're not gods in the religious sense. They don't demand worship, don't interfere with free will, don't hand down commandments. They're more like master artists running multiple creative projects simultaneously. Your entity is at this level. Right now, as you read this, your entity, the larger consciousness you're an expression of, is orchestrating not just your life but dozens of others. Some in your current time frame, some in what you'd call past or future, some in entirely different probability systems. Seth himself exists at this level, a teacher aspect of an entity that chose never to incarnate physically, working instead from non-physical dimensions. Second, emanation, incarnate personalities. This is you. The focused, temporary narrowing of your entity's awareness into a single lifetime, a single body, a single stream of experience. You're not the whole entity, you're one note in a vast symphony it's composing. And here's what makes this bearable. You chose this focus. Before birth, Seth says, you collaborated with your entity to design the parameters of this life, not every detail, but the major themes, challenges, relationships, and growth opportunities. You're not a victim of circumstance. You're an artist exploring a self-imposed constraint. Third emanation, probable selves. Every choice you don't make still gets explored. That job you didn't take? A version of you took it and is living that timeline right now. That relationship you walked away from? Another you is navigating it in a parallel probability. Seth revealed these aren't alternate timelines in some distant dimension, they're simultaneous. Equal realities, all feeding data back to your entity. Every version of you is real. Every path you didn't walk is being walked. And at the entity level, all of it gets integrated into a richer, more complete understanding of who you are across infinite variations. Fourth, emanation, subpersonalities and fragments. The parts of you that split off during trauma. The personas you wear in different contexts. The version of you at work versus with family versus alone. Even your dreams, Seth says, are populated by conscious fragments with their own mini-existence, their own limited awareness and purpose. You're not one self. You're a constellation of selves held together by the organizing principle of your entity. And beneath all of it, pervading everything like an invisible field, Seth describes what he calls the ground luminosity, the raw, undifferentiated consciousness that is the substance of all that is. It's the canvas on which every form appears. The silence between thoughts. The awareness watching the personality perform. This is the cosmology that shatters linear thinking. You are simultaneously a unique individual and an expression of your entity and the entity itself and all that is. Depending on which level of magnification you're viewing from, there's no contradiction. Just layers of truth that coexist. When Seth says, you create your own reality, he's not talking about manifestation techniques or positive thinking. He's saying that at the entity level, you're literally authoring the parameters of your existence. And at the level of all that is, you're authoring all existence, every soul, every reality, Every dimension. The forgetting happens so creation can feel real. So consequences can matter. So growth can occur. Because if you consciously remembered you were all that is, physical life would collapse into lucid dreaming. And the whole point, Seth emphasizes this relentlessly, is to explore limitation so completely that transcendence becomes meaningful. You're not here to escape the game. You're here because the game is the masterpiece. Here's the teaching that made even long-time Seth readers uncomfortable. All that is, despite being infinite and all-encompassing, is incomplete without you. Let that land. The ultimate reality, the source of all existence, the monad from which every soul and dimension emanates, it needs physical reality. It needs time-bound incarnations. It needs you, specifically, living this life, struggling with these challenges, experiencing this exact configuration of consciousness. Why? Because all that is experiences itself through limitation. Seth explains it like this. Imagine you're infinite. You contain all possibilities, all outcomes, all experiences simultaneously. There's no surprise, no discovery, no drama. You don't become anything because you already are everything. You don't learn anything because there's nothing you don't know. It's not suffering, exactly, but it's static. A white noise of infinite potential with no actual movement, no unfolding, no story. So all that is does the only thing an infinite creative impulse can do. It fragments. It forgets itself on purpose, creating focal points of consciousness that believe they're separate, that struggle, that search. That becomes something they weren't before. And in watching these fragments stumble back toward recognition, all that is experiences what it can't experience directly. Growth, transformation, relief of not knowing followed by the ecstasy of remembering. You're not here to return to God. You're here because God is using you to explore what it's like to not be God. This is the symbiosis. Seth reveals physical reality, with all its density and limitation, is all that is his greatest achievement precisely because it's so constraining. The slow unfolding of cause and effect, the solidity of matter, the illusion of separation. These create possibilities for experience that don't exist in the timeless, formless dimensions closer to source. In Framework 2, Seth's term for the non-physical dimension where probabilities exist simultaneously, everything is fluid, instantaneous, telepathic. You think something, it manifests. There's no delay between intention and result, but in Framework 1, physical reality, there's friction, resistance, time, consequence, and that friction is what makes experience rich, textured, meaningful. Seth says it plainly in the nature of personal reality. You did not come here to suffer, but you did come here to experience intensity. And intensity includes the full spectrum of emotion, sensation, and challenge. Now here's the part that's hard to hear. All that is doesn't love you the way religions promise. Not as a parent loves a child, with care and protection and intervention. It loves you the way an artist loves their art completely, obsessively, but not in a way that rescues you from the consequences of the canvas. You are the painting and the painter simultaneously. And the suffering, the beauty, the mistakes, the triumphs, those are features, not bugs. They're what make the art worth creating. This doesn't mean all that is cruel or indifferent. It means it's invested in your experience, not your comfort. It's experiencing every moment of your life from the inside as you, without the separation that would make it a spectator. When you cry, it cries through you. When you laugh, it laughs through you. When you discover something beautiful, it discovers it as you, for the first time from that unique angle. But here's the flip side Seth always emphasizes, the teaching that makes this bearable. Because you are all that is in disguise, you have access to the same creative power. The limitations you experience are self-imposed, chosen before birth, and can be renegotiated, but only if you're willing to accept the responsibility that comes with that power. This is where Seth's teaching becomes practical. He offers exercises inspired by his framework, journaling prompts where you dialogue with your entity, asking why you chose this particular challenge, visualization practices where you imagine your current limitation dissolving. Then notice what fear arises because that fear reveals the hidden benefit you're getting from staying limited. The point is always the same. Stop waiting for God to save you. You're not the child of God begging for rescue. You're God playing the role of a child who forgot the game. And the rescue happens the moment you remember. All that is needs you to live fully, to feel deeply, to create boldly, not because it's commanding you to, but because your aliveness is its aliveness, your creativity is its creativity. Your existence is the answer to a question it asked itself before time began. What would it be like to not be me? You're showing it the answer. One breath, one choice, one lifetime at a time. Now, Seth pulls back the curtain on what exists between you and the monad. Entities. The vast, multidimensional consciousnesses operating in the space between individual incarnations and all that is itself. These aren't angels or deities in the religious sense. They're not here to serve you or save you. They're master artists, and you're one of their creative projects. Seth describes his own identity this way. I am a teacher aspect of a larger entity that has never been physically incarnate. I work from dimensions you would call non-physical, influencing physical reality through channels like Jane Roberts, offering perspectives that help bridge the gap between your focused awareness and your entity's broader vision. Your entity is doing the same thing but from a different angle. It's orchestrating not just your life but dozens of others. Seth explains this in Seth Speaks. Time as you experience it is an illusion. From the entity's perspective, all of its incarnations exist simultaneously, the past life version of you in ancient Rome, the future life version exploring some distant star system, and this current you, all equally present, all feeding experience back to the entity in real time, and your entity isn't working alone. It's part of what Seth calls entity families or gestalts, groups of entities that collaborate on massive creative projects, like seeding consciousness in new realities, designing the parameters of entire historical eras, experimenting with different forms of awareness across multiple dimensions. These gestalts are so vast in scope, Seth says, that they're functionally indistinguishable from what religions call gods. And here's where his teaching gets controversial. Many of the deities worshipped throughout history, the ones who appeared to prophets, who delivered commandments, who demanded worship, weren't all. That is, they were powerful entities being mistaken for the ultimate source. The difference is critical. An entity, no matter how vast, is still a fragment of all that is, still exploring, still learning, still evolving. It has perspective, preferences, even limitations. It can be wise, but it can also be wrong. All that is, by contrast, is already complete. It's the totality, not a part. It doesn't prefer one path over another because it's experiencing all paths simultaneously. It doesn't need worship because it has no ego. It doesn't give commandments because it has no agenda beyond experiencing itself through infinite variation. So when a being appears to a mystic and says, "I am God, and here's how you must live," Seth would say, that's an entity speaking. Powerful, yes. Wise, perhaps, but not the monad, not the source. How do you tell the difference? Seth offers a litmus test, and it's devastatingly simple. Any being that claims to be the only God, the only truth, the only way that being is lying, either intentionally or through ignorance. All that is has no need for exclusivity. It's already everything. It doesn't compete because there's no competition. It doesn't demand because it has no lack. If a God tells you to obey, suspect entity contact. If a God tells you you're damned without its intervention, suspect entity projection. If a God builds a hierarchy with itself at the top, suspect entity agenda. Now, Seth is careful to clarify. Entities aren't malicious. Most of them are genuinely trying to help, operating from their level of understanding, offering guidance based on their own evolution. But they're not omniscient. They can be limited by their own unexplored shadows, their own biases, their own unfinished growth. And some entities, Seth warns, are genuinely manipulative. They feed on worship, on the psychic energy of devotion, and they craft religious systems specifically to generate that energy flow. He calls these power-hungry fragments, and he claims they're responsible for the most authoritarian, punitive religious frameworks in history. But here's the empowering part. You can communicate directly with your entity. You don't need priests, rituals, or intermediaries. Your entity is already connected to you. It is you at a broader level of awareness. And it's willing to offer guidance, wisdom, and perspective if you're willing to listen. Seth suggests a practice inspired by his teachings. Sit in silence, close your eyes, and ask inwardly, why did I choose this challenge I'm facing? Don't force an answer. Just sit with the question and notice what arises: images, feelings, sudden insights. That's your entity communicating, not in words necessarily, but in the language of inner knowing. But Seth also warns, your entity won't make your life easier. It's not interested in comfort. It's interested in meaning, in depth, in the richness of experience. So sometimes its guidance will push you toward more challenge, not less. Toward the very thing you've been avoiding, because that's where your growth lives. Your entity is the architect of your life's themes, the director of the play you're performing, and you're the actor who temporarily forgot. There's a script. The practice is remembering your lines while still delivering a convincing performance. This is Seth's most dangerous claim. Most beings worshipped as God throughout history aren't. They're entities. Powerful, yes. Advanced, certainly. But not the ultimate source. Not the monad. And their teachings reflect their specific biases, limitations, and evolutionary stages. Seth doesn't name names explicitly, but he strongly implies that many religious revelations, the ones delivered to prophets, mystics, channelers, came from entities operating at various levels of remove from all that is, and what these entities taught wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was incomplete, filtered through their perspective, colored by their agenda. Here's how to identify the difference. Based on frameworks inspired by Seth's teachings, true source contact feels like boundless love without agenda, like vast eternal silence, like the dissolution of self into something so complete there's no longer a you experiencing it. There's no doctrine delivered, no commandments, no moral framework. Just recognition, unity, the knowing that you are what you've always sought. Entity contact feels personal. It delivers specific teachings. It comes with moral guidelines, often emphasizing the entity's authority or wisdom. There's still a sense of separation. You're receiving information from something other. Even if that other is vastly more expanded than you, this doesn't mean entity contact is bad. Seth himself is an entity offering teachings through a channel. But he's always clear. Don't worship me. Don't take my word as gospel. Use what resonates, discard what doesn't. And remember that even my perspective is limited by the fact that I'm not the totality, just a fragment with a particular angle on truth. The problem arises when entities or their followers claim ultimate authority, when they say, this is the only path, these are the only rules. obey or be damned. That's when you know you're dealing with either an entity's ego or a manipulative fragment using religion to harvest psychic energy. Seth identifies specific distortions he traces back to entity-level projection, the concept of sign. Seth says bluntly, there is no sin. There are choices with consequences, yes. Actions that cause harm, absolutely. But the idea that you're inherently flawed, that you've fallen from grace, that you need redemption, that's an entity-level control mechanism. It keeps you feeling small, dependent, in need of intercession. All that is doesn't judge you. It's experiencing you from the inside. Your mistakes are just data, just variations in the infinite experiment of consciousness. The idea of one correct path. Seth emphasizes, there are infinite paths back to Source because there are infinite expressions of Source. The Christian path works for some personalities, the Buddhist path for others. Atheism even can be a path because recognizing there's no external God can lead to the recognition that you are the divine presence you were seeking. Any entity claiming only their path is valid is projecting their limitation onto all that. Is the notion that you need intercession. Seth's teaching is ruthlessly direct. You don't need a savior, a guru, a priest, or even an entity to reach all that is, because you're already it. The journey is psychological, not spatial. You don't travel to God. You stop believing you're separate from it, entities who position themselves as necessary gatekeepers are either confused about their own nature or deliberately hoarding power. And here's the shadow side Seth warns about. Some entities are genuinely manipulative. They've discovered that worship generates a specific kind of psychic energy, and they've designed entire religious systems to cultivate followers who provide that energy through devotion, prayer, ritual. Seth calls these power-hungry fragments. He says they're responsible for the most authoritarian religions, the ones that demand absolute obedience, that threaten eternal punishment, that require you to surrender your will completely. These entities aren't evil in the way we imagine demons. They're just fragments of all that is that have become fascinated with power dynamics and haven't yet evolved beyond the need for control. Solution? Seth's litmus test, which I'll repeat because it's that important. Any being that claims to be the only God, the only truth, the only way, that being is not the monad. It's a player in the game trying to convince you it's the game master. All that is has no ego, no need for worship, no preference for one path over another. It's experiencing all paths, all religions, all beliefs simultaneously, with equal curiosity and investment. If a God demands your obedience, it's not God, it's just another actor in the cosmic drama, playing a role it's taken too seriously. Seth's advice? Be respectful of entities. Learn from them when their wisdom resonates, but never surrender your sovereignty. Never let anyone physical or non-physical convince you that you're less than what you are, a localized expression of all that is. With full creative authority over your own experience, you're not here to worship. You're here to create. And no entity, no matter how vast, has the right to tell you otherwise. Can you bypass all the intermediaries and touch all that is directly? Seth says yes, but he warns, the experience will destroy every concept you have about God, about yourself, about reality itself. This chapter is a practical guide to what mystics call union and what Seth describes as temporary dissolution of the personality into Source. Not a complete manual, no script could be, but enough to point you in the direction Seth was pointing. First, the method. Seth is clear. This isn't prayer. Prayer addresses entities, not the monad. It assumes separation, a you asking something other for help. That reinforces the illusion. It's not visualization either. Visualization creates images, and all that is has no form. The moment you picture God as light, as presence, as energy, you've made it smaller than it is. It's not even meditation in the conventional sense, where you focus on breath or mantra or stillness. Those practices quiet the mind, yes, and that's useful. But they still imply a you achieving something, moving toward a goal. Seth describes something different. A practice of radical surrender, of ceasing all effort, all seeking, all becoming, of sitting so completely still, internally, that even the one who's sitting dissolves. What remains is just pure awareness, empty of content, empty of identity. And in that emptiness, the recognition arises not as a thought, but as a knowing that bypasses language entirely. This awareness isn't yours. It's the awareness, the single field of consciousness experiencing itself through the temporary lens of your personality. Let me decode the stages. Based on interpretive frameworks inspired by Seth's work, Stage 1, Dissolution of Identity. You sit. You let thoughts arise and pass without grasping them. You let emotions flow through without identifying with them. Gradually, the sense of being a separate self starts to flicker. The boundaries of you become porous. This is terrifying at first. The personality resists. It throws up fear, distraction, sudden urgency to do anything other than sit here dissolving. But if you don't resist the dissolution, if you let it happen, there's a shift. The terror transforms into relief. Because the separate self is exhausting to maintain. And letting it soften, even temporarily, feels like finally setting down a weight you've been carrying for lifetimes. Stage 2. The void. You enter what mystics call the dark night, but Seth reframes as the womb of potential. A state of such profound emptiness that even awareness of being aware dissolves. There's no you experiencing the void. There's just void, experiencing itself as void. This stage can last seconds or hours. Time becomes meaningless. And when the personality starts to return, which it must, because you still have a body, still have a life to navigate, there's often a moment of grief. Grief for the simplicity of that emptiness, the peace of non-being. But then comes Stage 3. Stage 3. Recognition. There's a sudden, irrevocable knowing. You are all that is, not a part of it, not connected to it. You are it, and you always have been. The personality returns, yes. You're back in the body, back in the thoughts, back in the story of you. But the personality returns transparent, like a character in a play who suddenly realizes they're an actor. The performance continues, but the actor no longer believes the character is real. This is what Seth calls conscious co-creation with your entity. You live as the personality, but you're no longer identified with it. You know it's a role, a focus, a game you're playing for the sheer richness of the experience, and this changes everything. Not because life becomes easier. Seth is clear that it doesn't. You still have to pay bills, navigate relationships, deal with suffering and loss and disappointment. But now you're doing it while simultaneously knowing none of it is ultimately real. And that creates a specific kind of existential loneliness. You can't share this knowing with most people. You can't rejoin the consensus trance completely. You've seen behind the curtain, and there's no one seeing it. Seth offers guidance for integration. Practices inspired by his framework. Treat the personality as a role you're playing, but don't collapse back into identifying with it fully. When you catch yourself taking the drama too seriously, pause. Breathe. Remember, this is the game. These are the rules you chose. The suffering is intense, yes, but it's also temporary, and it's teaching you something the formless dimensions can't. Live in the paradox. Be human and remember you're the monad pretending to be human. Don't use the knowing as an excuse to check out, to stop caring, to become detached. Use it to care more, to engage more, because you know this exact configuration of experience will never exist again. Seth's promise is simple and radical. Direct contact with all that is your birthright. Not a privilege reserved for saints, mystics, or advanced souls. You're already it. The practice is just remembering what you've always been. And once you remember, even once, the trajectory of your life shifts. You can't unknow it. And you wouldn't want to, because the knowing, painful as it sometimes is also the greatest freedom you'll ever experience. If all that is complete, infinite, and perfect, why does it create anything at all? This is Seth's most poignant teaching, the one that makes the cosmic game feel less like a test and more like a need. All that is fragments into billions of souls, realities, and dimensions because it's lonely. Not in the human sense of needing companionship. It contains all companionship within itself. Every relationship you've ever had, every connection, every moment of intimacy, all that is both sides of that exchange, simultaneously. But there's a kind of loneliness that only infinity experiences. When you know everything, when you are everything, when there's no other to relate to, no surprise to encounter, no discovery to make experience collapses into a singular, unchanging hum. Seth describes it as the ultimate existential crisis. Vast, yes. Complete, yes. But static. Like white noise. Beautiful in its totality, but lacking the texture, the drama, the aliveness that comes from not knowing followed by discovering. So all that does the only thing an infinite creative impulse can do. It forgets itself on purpose. It shatters into fragment souls, entities, personalities that believe they're separate. That struggle, that search, that long for reunion with something they can't quite name. And in watching these fragments stumble back toward recognition, all that experiences what it can't experience directly. Surprise, relief, the ecstasy of remembering after forgetting, the climax of reunion after separation. You are simultaneously the solution to God's loneliness and the expression of it. Think about it. Every moment you felt disconnected, lost, searching for meaning, that's all that is experiencing the poignant beauty of separation. Every moment you felt connection, love, recognition, that's all that is experiencing the relief of remembering itself through you. Seth says, the universe doesn't miss you when you're gone because you're never gone. But it needs you to forget so it can experience the intensity of finding itself again. This reframes everything. You're not broken. You're not fallen.